Hello everyone. Hello. Ladies and gentlemen, I address you today on a matter of profound significance. As the world continues to create violent uproars from the impacts of world affairs, it is evident that we are not capable of understanding the long-term consequences of our actions. And as the human activity in the realms of economics, geopolitics, and societal change that we focus on deeply at Pareto Economics. And throughout the work that we do, we realize that there's a big gap for the audience here to understand long-term trends in international affairs and how that impacts your portfolios. So in thinking about the work that we do, yes, we do in fact produce consulting and research and advice giving as such. But upon closer analysis, I think our line of business and what we work towards is nation building. And what we're going to showcase to you in the next 20 to 30 minutes for my keynote. I think half an hour is a long time, so if we're open for a long session for Q&A, we can also do that. It's to showcase to you why we do what we do and how we do what we do. And that's essentially based on two fundamental pillars. The first one is the ability to build a comprehensive model of world affairs and the drivers that drive world affairs, and to crystallize that for you. And secondly, it is to be able to take that and quantify it in order to create a quantifiable long-term measure of how countries are growing. So we are able to better judge the success or failures of nation states in their pursuit for growth. So that's the main aim for today. Like everything, it's good to start at the beginning. So we start in helping to answer one very specific question. That if you're able to answer this question, I believe any other derivative that you are facing in your challenges in the investment world, for corporations in the room, and also for state representatives through their embassies and through their representatives in the UK and elsewhere, is better answered by the following question. And that is, how will the world be changed and challenged over the next 100 years? Now that's a big question, it's a long question, and in the next 100 years we may not be here, but it sets priorities much more aligned to long-term trends. Because the problem we face is that when we're speaking with our clients and with leaders in the three sectors I mentioned, whenever there's a crisis, they tend to focus very short term because of the issues at hand, disregarding the long term. This is not a good approach to take, as you can imagine, because there's always going to be short-term shocks in the economy and things that we cannot account for, COVID being one of them, invasions being another one. So if we focus our attention on these short-term trends and forget the long term, we're in a position where we can't take advantage of the long term, and we're faced really in a very anxious place where we only think to satisfy shareholder needs in the time frame that they allot. So answering the question, how will the world be changed and challenged in the next 100 years, isn't to showcase where the world will be there, but it's there to stretch your imagination and to stretch your thinking so you can answer questions with a much more longer term outline. So how do you go about doing this? So building the model, how do you go about answering that question in an efficient way? What we do is that we start from the concept of first principles. Concept which is outlined in physics. You see that all the time. It's a concept born in physics, and we apply the concept of first principles in our analysis of world affairs. So what are the first principles of world affairs? We've identified 3 to 4. The first one we need to understand is who runs things, like who are the main actors in world affairs. From our assessment, nation states are the primary drivers of world affairs. So any analysis that we do into the future needs to be looked at through the lens of how countries are growing and what their ambitions and what their aims are. So if we understand that a nation is the first place to start, we need to ask ourselves, what do nations want? What's their MO? What are they driving towards? And from a deep analysis, we can say that what nations want essentially is power. Now, power is a concept which needs to be defined. And if you look throughout the books of history, we can see that this concept of power has been answered by different practitioners. But to take sort of a theoretical political science definition and apply it to world affairs, I think is much more useful. So what we're saying is that power isn't defined by the ability of one country to force the other to do what it wants. That's more a result of power. But rather, power is the ability of a country to secure their own interests. So one more time, it's the ability of a country to secure their own interests. That is what power is, defined. So we have that as a definition. The next point then is to define what do countries want? How can they secure their own interests? What do they have at their disposal which they can use to control their own interests? This is where we get into the analytics part. So for a long time, this has been the key question that we have been trying to answer. How do countries go about securing whatever interest they decide is important for them at any given moment? Whenever there's a change of cabinet or a change in direction by democracies and non-democracies, understanding what they have at their disposal to do so needs to be crystallized. So we've identified what we call 6 centers of power that each country have at their disposal that they can use to secure their own interests, which include the following. We have their active consumer markets that each country has, large or small. We have their military balance. Some countries may not have one, but the majority do. They also have their technological leadership in different capacities. Following this, they have their systemically important commodities. Again, some may have more than others. The next one is their geo-strategic positioning, where they're located in the world and sort of the relationships they have with other countries. They also have their financial strength. Now, if you were here last year, you would have seen this. And this isn't new for those who were here last year. But we've innovated from last year. And what we've done is that for each center of power that we've identified, we have created themes which we've attached onto them, which best reflect their nature, which go essentially under here. And we'll go through which each of these themes are. So this is the structure of our thinking. And then from there, what we have done is that we've attached a number of variables to each theme, which again gives you context to how to best measure these 6 centers of power. So it's a very quantified approach. And then from there, we essentially assemble all of these 6 centers of power, and we create 6 separate indices to them. So if you're looking at the development of the US, or for China, or for Botswana, or for any country in the world, you're able to use our index to look through these 6 dimensions of countries. And then what we've done is we've put them all together to create something called the Global Power Index, which essentially is an amalgamation of all 6 represented by one final index, which showcases how countries rank in all 6 together. So that's essentially how we've created this. So if we're going to look into each theme, I think what we should do is delve into what composes each individual theme to give you a better idea of how we do what we do. Now you may agree or disagree, that's fine, but this is how we do it. For our active consumer market, the 2 main themes are consumer spending and demographics. Now these words you may think they mean something, which they may not do, and the point of that is these are just the overall thematics of each theme. We also have, in the military balance, concepts of a country's technological advantage and their expenditure and government control. For technological leadership, we have their technological development and their technological adoption in different capacities. For a country's systemically important commodities, again, we have their production of commodities, their consumption of commodities, and also their energy security, which we've created into a sub-index onto itself, which we haven't launched this time around, but we will be showcasing that in later iterations of the index. We also have a country's geo-strategic positioning, which include their physical advantages in different capacities, and also the relationships that they're able to foster with their neighbors and with other state actors across the world. And there's a way in which we've quantified that. For a country's financial strength, we include themes such as their debt, their capacity, investment, and financial importance. Again, these can be broken down into each variable that we've chosen to measure this. So it's a very fractal index, as you can imagine. What we've then done is we've combined them to map 7 separate regions across the world. So from North America to South America, Europe, the MENA region, Sub-Saharan Africa, Central Asia, and the Asia Pacific are the regions that we've broken down. We've ranked and measured 194 countries in our index, up from 26 the first time we did it, to 113, to 194. So what I'm about to show you now is the Global Power Index Top 20. Because one of the criticisms of last year is that we put everything on the screen and no one could read anything. So we have the top 20, and to have access to all of them, you'll be able to see them in the coming days. So this is how the world looks like according to our Global Power Index 2023. So I'll leave it here for a moment for you to see, to analyze, to get accustomed to it. You may have debates as to whether one country should be there or one country shouldn't be there. This is the top 20. Again, we're measuring the ability of a country to secure their own interests. That's how we define power. So that's the way you should be looking at this. So this is the top 20. So if we were to break this down to see what themes emerge at least in the top 20, this is what we'll be able to see. Let's start from this top line. The top 5 countries are in the Security Council, the permanent 5 members of the Security Council, plus 1, which is Germany. So given their military might and other aspects, we see that they rank towards the top. Europe is the most populous region in the top 20. 65% of the countries in the top 20 are European countries. But also what's important to see is what regions aren't represented in the top 20. So we have Europe represented, we have North America, and we have Central Asia and Asia Pacific. But South America, MENA, and Sub-Saharan Africa, we have no country representatives in the top 20 from these regions. So when you're looking at countries like Saudi Arabia, perhaps, maybe Kenya, the UAE, you may expect to see them somewhere there. But from our analysis across all the indices put into one, this is what we see. To give you a little sneak peek, what we also have is the top 10 in 3 selected other indices from the 6 that we've created. So you can have a chance to see how the countries rank there. So again, the picture changes for the sub-indices where we see other regions represented in the top 10 at least. So if you go through them for the active consumer market, the United States and China, as they were for the GPI, also rank very high. Qatar comes in 3rd, UAE 4th. So again, heavy on the MENA region. You can have another Asia Pacific country, India there, Bahrain, Singapore, Luxembourg, Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia. So some regions missing from the GPI, which are here, and vice versa. If you go into financial strength, again, United States, China, Japan, Germany, Singapore, UK, India, France, Switzerland, and Australia. And the Geo-Strategic Positioning Index, we have Italy, France, Germany, Greece, Finland, Czech Republic, Denmark, Sweden, Spain, and Ireland. Now, I think I should give more credence towards the Geo-Strategic Positioning Index because maybe that's an index which isn't as intuitive to understand. The other 2, I think, are pretty straightforward. So if we're focusing on what does the what is a country's Geo-Strategic Positioning, what does that mean? Well, that was a sneak peek towards the next one. Let's not show that yet. So when we're thinking about a country's Geo-Strategic Positioning, what we're looking at is fundamentally where they are located in the world and essentially what positives and negatives they have to them. So we're looking at if they have access to the sea or ports. We're looking at the relationships they have, any trade deals they have, any military alignments they have with countries around them to find out how important is this country, the chokeholds, maritime chokeholds that they have and the importance of those all coalesce together into one index. And this then can be used by the people in this room to make much more longer term investment decisions by seeing essentially over time how these countries grow and change in their rankings. Not for their ranking's sake, but it's a reflection of their ability to secure their own interests if they move higher. Countries which rank lower doesn't necessarily mean they're weaker, they just mean they have much more upside to gain with the right focus of government. Because we're in the business of helping governments essentially not only increase their rankings for their ranking's sake, but improve their economies and improve their long-term trajectory and how they should be thinking about growth. This gives them an opportunity to see where they stand in these indices. So what I'm going to show you now is the comparison between China and the US and Russia and Ukraine as it relates to all of the 6 sub-indices and how they rank together. So we have a chance to see where are some of the strong points or weak points between these 4 different pairings, or 2 pairings rather. So if we're looking firstly at Russia and Ukraine, this is the same kind of charts but put into 2 different visualizations. Again, only looking at our sub-indices and through sort of a bar chart and through a sort of radar chart also. You can focus on whichever one you like, they both give the same information. So we can see that naturally for Ukraine, its military balance compared to Russia's is negligible, to say the least, which is why reliance on the West for military aid, equipment, expertise, etc. is so much needed. You may think in terms of their technological leadership, why do they look like they're the same? But again, this looks at their scores and it doesn't look at where they rank. Between these two, we could have 20, 30 countries in between Russia and Ukraine, but this only gives the scorings again. Between 0 and 100 is where all the sub-indices rank, and for the Global Power Index, we rank it out of 600. So we essentially add all the scores together to create the GPI, the Global Power Index. So this is a lay of the land for Russia and Ukraine in 2023. We do have historical data that I'll be showcasing to see how these two countries and any combinations you want to look at have evolved over time, to see, again, if you're a country, what you should be doing to focus your attentions on. If you're an investor, to see how these countries have developed across these metrics, to find out, are there unseen opportunities for you to invest, and to partner with these countries to improve these rankings and these indices for themselves. Let's now look at China versus the USA. Oh, this is it, yes. China versus the USA. I think this is on a timer. So this is the lay of the land for 2023 between China and the USA. Again, we're revealing our scores, although we don't do this typically, but one of the comments from last year was we would like to see more contextual data about the index so we can look at it more deeply, so we can assess the value of it and also the lay of the land for these countries. So we've compared Russia and Ukraine and China and the US. So looking at the picture, again, both the same information, just displayed differently. Over time, we see how in 2023, this is where it was for these countries. So if we go through each individual one to see how they've developed. Firstly, both countries active with supermarkets. Naturally, the US being the biggest one, China following closely behind, we can see how this is apparent in the data. The military balance, again, very uneven, I suppose you'd say, for different reasons. Technological leadership, again, measured by what we measure, this is the lay of the land for them. The US edging ahead of China, for sure. The geostrategic positioning, again, where they're located, again, you can't do much to change your positioning here. That's the one thing. Some of these indices are easier to improve, some are harder. For example, a country's commodities, unless you're blessed with them underneath your feet, you can't do much, so you need to rely on imports. And also for a country's GSP, geostrategic positioning, some aspects are much more easily malleable than others, but some aren't. They're systemically important commodities, the same thing. We see China outranking the US in that. Again, don't only look at oil production, because people typically look at what they're comfortable with and what they know. But when we're looking at their systemically important commodities, we're looking at the three themes that we mentioned. So energy security, production, and consumption of different commodities, and also the financial strength. Now again, this being a snapshot can give you only so much information. But again, looking at it through a historical lens, you will be able to see the stories that countries tell about themselves to the world, and if they're backing up their stories through the data. Because a country may say, we want to do this, you see? But what this shows is, have they done what they said? And if they do want to continue on this path, what they should be doing into the future to make sure that they actually are on track to hitting their goals and hitting their agendas. Which leads us into a section of the talk which applies this data to the real world, I suppose you'd say. Last year, I discussed topics that we called the world's macro trend catalysts, which is a fancy way of saying, what are the fundamental drivers which drive these indices to produce the results we see today? We've identified two. The first was the great convergence of the global four. Now let me break that down. So we have what we say across time, when countries grow and lose their power across these 6 different areas, 4 themes start to emerge in the world which become very, very important. And we see this every day. Firstly, globalization becomes much more apparent. Although there is a conversation, globalization is dying because of the rift between China and the US, we don't believe that's the case. Globalization becomes even more important as other countries become much more powerful in these areas. Secondly, geopolitics and geopolitical risk becomes much more apparent in parts of the world where we haven't really seen it before. Only because now countries have more of a voice because they can back it up with these statistics. So if you look into the past, in the 20s, Saudi Arabia was a fledgling country, but as they discovered oil, they built up the reserves, they built their cash supply. They were able then, with the direction that they wanted to take the country into, become a very regional, very powerful regional player. Over time, we see these things developing. So geopolitics, in other parts of the world, we will see risks happening because neighbors now, which are edging on others, are now more confident to stake their flag in the ground to say this is what we want to achieve, and we have the means to back it up. Or we can then at least align with countries who in the past didn't find us interesting, but now they do because of these reasons. So they become much more apparent. Geopolitics. Transformative technology and the scale of technology across the world grows, not only because Silicon Valley is producing the innovation, but other parts of the world are also growing in their ability to provide technology to the world. And the adoption of technology across the world becomes much more apparent. And the results of that societally need to be understood much more deeply, I think, by countries. And also investors and corporations who are looking to enter these markets or who are already in these markets and looking to expand further. And finally, societal change in different aspects becomes much more important. As your populace becomes richer, as sentiment of different cultural trends becomes much more diverse, people demand more things of their governments and of corporations than that they did in the past. So the change of not only sentiment but demographics becomes something which countries which were maybe much more stable before are seeing influxes of people from around the world and ideas which are very foreign to them. And this is causing societal change to be a factor which is growing. This then leads us to saying that these then converge. All of these things are happening at the same time. And when they happen at the same time, risks become much more divergent too. As they diverge, their risks become much more unique. So that's the first one. And the second one, which is much more important, is looking at what we call segmented polarity. We've heard the concept of multipolarity many times. I'm sure you've seen it on the news and you've had a conversation within your own organizations about it. But that assumes that countries are growing equally across these different factors. Now with this new knowledge, you know that countries don't only grow in one direction, but they diverge in their importance. As we saw in the slides before, Russia being much more militarily powerful than Ukraine. And in this case, although quite equal, we see China edging out on the US for their SICs. We will start to see, and we've seen, blocks of countries emerge in the world because they are offering things to each other which they have a deficit of. So they can converge together through organizations like BRICS or the Shanghai Cooperation Association organization, through the G7 as well. And these collections of countries happen because these countries have something of unique standing that they can offer to the other groups. So when a country is looking then at this landscape of how this world is changing through this new lens, something becomes very, very important and apparent. And that is the following. As countries grow in their COPs, competition around the world for attention becomes much more aggressive. In this time period, I believe, countries need to showcase their USPs much more evident, much more strongly than ever before. In these three specific areas. Attention, again, is much more widespread, so they're competing for attention. They're also competing for capital, and they're also competing for trust. Trust of the people within the countries to say, I can build my life here and I don't need to emigrate elsewhere, legally or illegally, to make my life. And also, again, naturally capital through the businesses represented in this room and in this city of London that we have around us. And again, attention from the key stakeholders to shape their story, I would say, to the world, and to make that much more apparent and make sure that they have a good story to tell that they can actually achieve. Because what's worse than a bad story is a story that you say you can achieve, but you don't actually do so. That again loses trust in the investors and in the people that are in your countries. And we can see this throughout time. And a solution to this, and I'll end on this point, is the utmost importance of countries to create what we call a vision plan. This is simply to say a set of ideas which are codified in a document that allow them to stake their flag in the sand to say, this is who we are and this is what we want to develop into the future. And if you agree with this vision, then you can join us, corporations, investors, and other countries to help us achieve this. So we see China 2020, China Made in China 2025. We see Vision 2030 of Saudi Arabia. We also have the new Uzbek vision, which the new leadership is putting forward as well, as examples of vision plans. This, I believe, needs to be done by every single country in the world. They need to either revisit or revise what they currently have, or they need to create one. As small or as big, as sort of humble or as ambitious as they want, but they need to be thinking in these long-term ways. Because although we have democracy, which changes leaderships every 4 to 5 years, if you have a good strategy in place and a good vision, it's going to be much harder for the next leader to change it, because there's going to be so much demand in seeing this into fruition. So this is what we do as a firm. This is the data that we have to show. And I'll end it here for Q&A, and automatically happened itself. So thank you so much, and I'll take questions now.
Thank you very much for this fascinating presentation. I mean, I'm very happy and glad because you invest a lot of time with me every quarter. We talk about geopolitics and so on for our clients. My question is, you spoke about a lot of data, no? Data that you have to input to create this end in your index, not that is prepared enough to create, then to have the output.
Yeah.
That at least could be like vision. Can you touch a little bit more about the reliability of the data? Because today, as we know, data is pretty the new gold.
Yeah.
So this is also a key element for the output.
Yeah. Yeah.
On the first side. On the second side, you mentioned about at the very beginning this 100-year time horizon.
Yeah.
It's pretty long, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So my question is how long and how often you rebalance it?
Okay. Good questions. Yes, and the answer to the first one is that we were very, very focused on making sure we use, quote unquote, the right kind of data, because data can be very easily manipulated depending where it comes from, and it can tell any story you want it to tell. That's something about data. So the first problem we ran into when creating this index is it's very comprehensive. If we made it easier on ourselves to cut it down, to focus on very small variables, then we would have had a much easier job. But around the table when we were talking about this, we thought the first problem we run into is the scale of what we're doing. The second is that a lot of countries don't have the data points maybe that we need, because there's missing data naturally. Some countries don't have it at all, or they don't share it. So we're left with 5 years, 2 years, 1 year of missing data. And we can't just guess what that score would be. But luckily we have a very reliable and fantastic quantitative team who, through quantitative methods, have managed to bridge that gap in ways in which they are much better positioned to answer. And if you want, I can put you into contact with them. But that was something that I stressed, that data can tell any story you want it to tell. So we need to make sure that we pick data which is as less privy to manipulation as possible, because we didn't want to have that kind of data involved in our index. And the second point, as it relates to the 100-year time horizon, the way we do this index, I suppose, is that every year we collect data for the year that passed, because that's what's available. And for some variables that we don't have, we need to create our own variables for. So again, we create it ourselves so we know what we're doing. And it's our intention that anyone who uses this data uses it to develop a long-term theory in their own mind of how the world is changing. We don't want to impart our own ideas to them and they just use what we have. We want to be, I suppose, a sparring partner for them to develop their own theories and their own ideas of where the world is going. Because an idea you created yourself, you're much more likely to believe in than one given from the outside. Although we have our own theories of where the world is going and why it's going that way, and we provide the data to back it up, this can be used by anyone who is in a corporate position as an investor or as a government for their own means. So if you're a government, for example, again, looking at historical data that we've created, you can see where your country has been and the trajectory of where it's going. So if you're a new leader, you can say, well, this is what has happened before, and this is what we want to create through a vision plan, so we can then project a much more positive view of our country into the future. And then for investors as well, if they're looking to use this to see where is the underpriced attention, I suppose, on countries, because some countries rank lower doesn't necessarily mean they are weaker, but it means that they have a lot bigger upside swing that with the right partners can see great investments in those parts of the world. So that's how I'd answer that. Thank you, Antonio.
Hi, Juan. Excellent presentation. I really like it. I think that's very useful. But institutions like the World Bank and the FMI, they produce similar reports a year, taking as well as public data submitted by the countries. have you compared your result with them, and at the same time, have you found some hints about how the information was presented in that? Because there are some countries that regularly you can see on international reports, and some others that we are surprised for the comparison. So, have you measured with them, and have you found something why they are mentioning it and you are not, and the other way around?
Yeah. So have we taken any learnings from other reports, basically? Yeah. Yeah.
No, that's a really good question. So the reason why this index was created in the first place is because, from what I've seen, and I'm a researcher at heart, I haven't really found anything which looks at the world as comprehensively as this. Because if there was, we wouldn't need to create something like this. And when creating this, if you were to see this presentation 5 years ago, it would look very different, because the concepts have evolved and changed and grown to make them what they are today. And we have had conversations with the likes of the IMF, for example, for them to be able to see how they can integrate our data into their decision-making processes. And we've used data from them also into our work as well. So there has been a cross-fertilization of ideas and use cases for the data that we all collect. But the difference between them is that this is a for-profit venture. So although they have data coming from governments and they present it as primary source data, what we do is that we take it and we turn it into something much more actionable through our consulting and our research as a package together that any client can take on board and use however they want to. So there have been conversations, and we continue to have them as time passes. Thank you, Juan. Thank you. Neil.
Is there anyone else who has a question? I think we have there in the third row. Yeah, go for it.
Klisman, thank you very much. Two questions, if I may. First of all, well done on the presentation. You certainly achieved the clarity your colleagues and we can to give us. First one really is just, I was impressed to see that all of the top 10 in terms of geospat position were European.
Let's see.
If I read it correctly.
Yes, you are right.
Just to make it clear in my own mind, how do you square that with, for example, last year's strains in Europe based on their energy dependence from Russia? And secondly, just to follow up, Antonio, on the forward-looking nature of your analysis, the cobwebs, which were really impressive for 2023, those charts.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
I'd love you to send the one on tech leadership, US v China, to potential President Trump, because if he does get in, that may tend to become less protectionist. But if he is going to get in and become more protectionist, I'm assuming countries in your index that are relatively more open, like Germany and Southeast Asia, might take a fall. So I'm wondering, how far ahead do your indices go in telling us where countries may end up?
That's a really good question. And you'll see that in the second half of this after break. But I'll give you a taster now, Neil. What we're doing is that we are working towards developing forecasting metrics for this data, because it's easy to collect past data. All you need to do is just collect it, analyze it, and produce it. But seeing where countries will go into the future, I think that's the secret sauce that people will find very valuable. And we're in the process of creating metrics that we can forecast to the best of our capabilities how these countries will grow into the future. But what's more valuable really than that is giving the forecasting an aim. Meaning, just like a fortune teller, you ask them about a specific part of your life. They don't tell you generally this is what you'll be doing. You ask them, where will I be in my love life or my health or whatever. If a country leader would take advantage of this, the more specific their question is to how they should develop, the more powerful this index is. Because with that, we're able to then produce very bespoke recommendations as to what they could be doing better to grow their economies and to grow their influence in whatever areas they want to, and whatever time period they think they have able to them to actually do that. So that's what's important. Not this kind of stuff will tell you interesting highlights, I suppose, and it's a good thing to talk about over a business meeting. But the real power comes in what questions do you want to ask that this can actually answer. So if you're an investor looking to invest in emerging markets and you're looking towards why Mexico wants to join BRICS, then you can essentially do analysis of all the BRIC countries through this index to see where they land and how Mexico, for example, can be of use to the BRICS and what their intention is of joining them. So the more specific your question is, the more powerful this measure becomes, because then you can focus your attention And through our help, you can develop a much more coherent view on whatever it is that you want to analyze. And your first question once more?
In summary?
I think it was the top 10 all being European.
Yes.
Top 10 being European. That's something which we found surprising too. Because you can imagine countries like Egypt maybe would be there because of the Suez Canal, right? Or the Bosphorus Strait in Turkey, or the Strait of Malacca, for example. But again, the reason as to why they rank where they are is because the themes that we've chosen and the variables that were associated showcase that this is the case. And how that relates to Russia, again, this is something which pipelines are a measure of our index and where they come from and where they go to. So most like what you'll see next year is a change in that data because the fundamentals have changed on the ground too. Now again, why they're there isn't as important as what they will do into the future to make sure that they remain, I suppose, there for their own sake. You know, this can tell you what our data has shown in the past, but it can't tell you currently in this state what countries can do into the future, because each country needs to decide where they want to be in terms of their energy security, at least into the future. And this sort of disruption of energy flows by Russia is something which I suppose has been done for a greater good, being Ukraine, but the impacts on the economies of Europe are undoubted, and they're suffering because of that. So this can't tell you why, but it can tell you how it's been going on. And looking into the forecasting measures, with what's happening on the ground now, we can use this and to forecast if Europe decides to stay on the route that it is currently, this is where we can see it, right? And then we'll have, if you listen to what we say essentially, or if you take these recommendations, this is where you are most likely to be, right? So best case scenario, worst case scenario, most likely scenario. Scenario planning is essentially what I'm trying to say, is what you can do with this when it's applied to a specific question.
Thanks. No, my pleasure, Mia.
Thanks. So how do you think about the vision 2030 or 5-year plans or whatever?
Yeah.
How do you account for regime stability or maybe systemic stability if you in a democracy?
What do you mean?
If you're looking forward to X country's got a plan for 2030,
Yeah.
how does the GPI account for how likely if not the exact government, but the system still to be in place in 2030?
That makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah.
That's a good question, because regimes are important to see the ability of longevity in policy, I suppose you'd say.
Right, yeah.
So that's a good question. What we don't do is we're political system ambivalent. We don't really mind if you're a democracy or a non-democracy, because what we're measuring is your capabilities to secure whatever interests you have. You see? So as it relates to, remind me one more time your point.
So yeah, but not to say it. How do you account in forecasting?
Yeah.
How do you account for the likelihood of any given
Yes.
system
Yes.
to
Okay.
still be in operation in
Yeah.
say, 10 years' time?
So the way that I would answer that is by saying, you go to a doctor, right? You say, doctor, I've got a problem with my hip. He says, okay, well, take this, and it should make you feel better. Now, the doctor can't force you to take it over the time period that he's told you to do it. He trusts you to do it, So then it's like asking the doctor, how likely am I to get better without knowing my motivations for taking this medicine? But the only difference is that you're not looking at yourself and your health, you're looking at someone else taking over your body, and hopefully they'll be able to give you that same medicine. What we can't account for, essentially, is the likelihood of a government to keep the same policies in place. But what we are saying, what we are saying concretely, is that if they were to enact policies for the long term, which are good for the stakeholders that they work with, it is very unlikely for these to change dramatically as the next regime comes into place, only because the business interests and the diplomatic interests and the societal interests will be so ingrained in seeing this through that the next regime, I suppose, would have a tough time in pivoting too much in their own aims. Naturally, they can if they want to, because they're there for that purpose, but we can't guarantee they'll do it. But what we can say is that if you do this, the likelihood for your country to succeed in these ways are much better.
Yeah. You think that, this is just speculative, but you think there might be a way to score that at some stage?
It's very difficult because you can't score intention. You can't score someone's ambitions as a leader or their own political strategy. That's very, very difficult to do. So what What you can say is that we score their ability to do something, but not their motivation to do something. You see? Motivations come with, dialogue with those country leaders continuously, so you understand their own mentalities on the world and their region and specific sectors and what they want to achieve, and hopefully build trust enough in not only that party, but perhaps the other parties to say, well, this is a good plan that we are going to continue.
Right. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Hello.
My name is Eve, and I work with the British Uzbek Society.
Yes.
And you just mentioned the 2030 vision
Yes.
that's Uzbekistan today.
Yes.
I just wonder your personal opinion of the country's development
Yes.
and the vision.
Yes. As you know, we're both very connected to the Uzbek embassy here in London, as are our colleagues in the front here too. So I think an important thing to do for any leader when they come into power, if they're ambitious and if they have aims, is to say, what did my past regime do which were good, and to keep those, and what did they do that were bad that we can get rid of? And I think thankfully Uzbekistan has taken on an approach which is more long-term than people may expect, because we don't really see much media attention on Uzbekistan or Central Asia in general in the West, unless something happens, then no. So I'm lucky enough to be in contact with different government officials there, and I can see from the inside at least, they have a very good, how can I say this? They have a very long-term and resourceful perspective as to where they want to take their country. There's a lot of activity that they do in the UK through Uzbek IT Park, as I'm sure you're very much aware, and other factors that they are doing. I think they could be doing more so in other aspects. I can talk to you about them now or after if you like. But with any system, it's always good to get a perspective that isn't your own, so that you can judge yourself against someone else, and also judge yourself against other countries which perhaps have gone through the same transformation you want to go through, or are currently going through it, so you can compare notes with them. So this allows you a framework, or a benchmark rather, so you can see how other countries have done it and what you could do better to improve your own country. So I like the direction that they're taking, in short, and I wish them the best. And I think we did invite them to come today. If they're not here, then they'll definitely get this as a recording to see what they missed. Thank you so much, Evie.